Welcome to another great episode of the Contractor Business Builder podcast. Today we have Stephen Pivnik. Most owners build to keep going. Stephen Pivnik teaches owners how to build to finish. He is the CEO of AIP Advisory. How are you doing today, Stephen?
I'm doing great, Derek. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Wonderful. So can you tell us what AIP Advisory stands for and then a bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, great question. Nobody's ever asked me that. AIP stands for Anything is Possible. I'm very addicted to endurance sports, specifically Ironman distance triathlons, and anything is possible is the tagline for Ironman. So I decided to use
Mm.
those initials for my advisory work because I truly believe that anything is possible when it comes to entrepreneurship, which is a good segue to what I do or what I did, my little bit of my background. I consider myself a recovering entrepreneur. My last company, I grew to just over 200 employees across 12 countries. It was a software company. We sold that to a $4 billion competitor of ours and really enjoyed the entire journey. Did a lot of things right, did a lot of things wrong. And right now it's really rewarding to pay it forward from an advisory perspective to help other founders go through a similar, final stages of growth and then exit journey, which is my core competency.
Wonderful. No, that's obviously seen the whole trajectory of a business from start to finish, which is a unique perspective to scaling a business to exiting it successfully. And can you maybe speak a little bit to how leadership plays into growing a business and some of the biggest challenges you had through going from startup to completion?
Yeah, leadership is obviously incredibly important, right? Both from the founder's perspective, but as importantly from the rest of the executive team. And what I found in my own business and on advising with others, most founders, myself included, are incredibly loyal to staff that have been there, from the get-go. And almost always, especially when you get to a company that's reached a $10 million, per year level or higher, the company outgrows the individual that was there from the beginning. Sometimes the founder themselves, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
these are very tough decisions for founders to make, especially with folks that have been so loyal and so integral to the growth of the company. But unfortunately, it's just a necessary evil that needs to take place. And
Mhm.
otherwise, the leadership structure and capability just isn't going to be what the company needs to continue to grow and to see a successful exit. So easier said than done, super tough, but
Yeah.
huge part of leadership.
Yeah, extremely understandable where you want to be loyal. You have people that have been working with you or for you for a long time, and essentially the business changes, and sometimes that means personnel needs to change as well. How do you know it's maybe the right time, or how do you approach those decisions, especially if it's you're going to be multiple people inside your organization?
Yeah, you kind of see it start creeping up from an analysis paralysis perspective on certain issues, right? Folks that are tasked with making big decisions in an environment that they've never been in before. For example, if you have a head of finance that's running your finance and accounting function, and he or she has never run, let's say, a $20 million company, and you're now exceeding that level. It's really not his or her fault, but they just don't have the experience of running an organization at that level. So you see things creep up, bad decisions, delayed decisions, over analyzing things and asking for a lot of input from various other stakeholders. Those are just some of the telltale signs that the person is struggling a little bit or making it up as he or she is going along versus somebody that you can bring in that's run a $30 million organization or a $40 million organization from a finance and accounting perspective. He or she is going to be making decisions, based on his or her playbook and based on their previous experience, and it's going to be a lot easier and smoother for the organization and for the company as a whole.
Yeah, great distinction there. I think a lot of people think when they scale, they're just sort of adding more people, but really there needs to be some potential, shuffling, reorganization, as well as, the business outgrows capacity of certain roles or people within the organization. Now, how do you approach like, do you promote leaders within inside the company? Like, how does that look as the company grows? Or what do you look for when you bring outside leadership, experience, skills, culture? How do you grow that team
Yeah,
of
I'm a huge fan of promoting from within, and obviously, people have to earn the right to be promoted, and many of them, do deserve it. And I'm all for giving those individuals the opportunity to operate at the next level. But as long as clear expectations are set with the individual saying, hey, let's just pick on their head of sales because that's numbers, right? Hey, we're really getting to this, high level now. We're about to approach $25 million in sales. You've been doing a phenomenal job to this point, but if I see any hiccups in the road or any bumps, then I reserve the right as the owner to bring in somebody who's operated at this level. So I'm backing you. I'm going to support you, and let's see how it goes. But let's just be aware that a different decision may be made in the future. And again,
Hmm.
easier said than done. I've done some of these types of moves correctly and with a good outcome. And I've done some of these moves, with mistakes. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
going to be some, trial and error required when you're going, which is good news, right? If you have to make these decisions, that means you're growing. So that's
Mhm.
fantastic. But be
Yeah.
prepared for some, trial and error with the continuous shaping and molding of the leadership team.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And how do you approach communication with inside the team so that they like you explicitly, stating as you did that what your expectations are and that there's room there, but if they can't, perform, then you may have to bring someone else in and things like that. But as far as like team communication, make sure everyone's aligned, everyone's on the same page, that they kind of know what to expect as you scale up. What are
Yeah,
some
I
of the
mean,
specific like meetings you have or ways that you communicate with inside your team?
yeah, towards the tail end of my journey with the company I just mentioned, it was called Binary Tree. I became a massive fan of KPIs and reports. Not that we didn't have reports in earlier stages of the company, we did, but it was, I'm not embarrassed to say it was amateur hour compared to what we evolved into. I eventually got to the point where I met with every single department head and we jointly came up with a set of reports and KPIs that they were going to produce and present at a newly instituted operational review meeting. The intention there was to have meetings based on numbers and based on data, and more importantly, based on trends, right? It's not, a number for the sake of a number is okay, but it's better in the context of a trend. And everybody was expected to show trends heading in the right direction, right? To the right and up. And if everybody, and so there was a little bit of an internal competition that ensued. Nobody wanted to show up to a meeting with their numbers going in the wrong direction, but it
Yeah.
did happen, right? It happens all the time. It can be
Hmm.
smooth sailing 100% of the time, but if those numbers were going in the wrong direction, they were expected to present a remediation plan on how they were going to fix it. And I love Jack Welch's approach from GE. If a president of a division didn't perform well for multiple quarters, he would have a president of a different division that was performing well, swoop in and help him or her out. So
Mm. Yeah.
not always doable in smaller companies, but
Hmm.
he's a guru, and his book is still remains a classic, the GE way.
Yeah, definitely. That brings up a reminder for me about prioritizing your time or your team's time to helping those that are struggling over maybe helping the ones that are doing well exceed. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the type of culture that you want to have. Like, for instance, I have a client right now that's on one end of the extreme in terms of helping and taking an incredibly long time to mentor, tutor, assist, get advisors for folks that, really aren't cutting it. Which, because again, that's the culture in the organization. We stand by our people. We're gonna, give them the necessary training, et cetera, et cetera. I believe in that a lot, but to a certain point. I mean, I wouldn't let that process, last a year. If there's, certain areas for improvement, you need to have, that heart to heart conversation with the individual, put together a game plan for improvement, give it some time, give it check in definitely no later than, a month to see how it's improving. I would say all in, maybe give it 3 months before you have to take some action.
Makes sense. And just going back before, what are a few like key KPIs that you always look for that you guys developed as aside like some of the top KPIs that you would look at with your divisions?
Sure. And obviously cash flow, right? We were a bootstrap company. We did
Hmm.
not have any outside funding. So, cash flow was incredibly important. We did have a credit line, and I advise a lot of companies that don't have credit lines because they feel that they're always flush with cash. Please get a credit line because you never know when you're going to need it. And the need for cash is going to come up at the worst possible time. And it's going to be impossible for you to get it when you need it. So get a very, very fat line of credit, even if you don't need it, and just have have available to you. So cash flow was huge. Obviously, profitability. And we wanted to, we measured gross margin and margins on our various lines of business. We did a great job of measuring sales and sales activity. So not only looking at pipeline, which we definitely looked at, which deals are committed, which ones are qualified, which ones are, working their way up the ladder. We also did a really good job of looking at the activity of the sales force because that's a leading indicator as to how great the pipeline is going to be. If there are not enough calls, if there are not enough meetings, and if there are not enough presentations or demonstrations to the customer, then that's going to show up eventually in a smaller than expected pipeline. So, and then we also measured, internal employee satisfaction, which we took super seriously, and we did so via something called a Q12 survey. And then we also measured external customer satisfaction, the NPS scores.
Great. Yeah. Got the, like, as you mentioned, leading indicators super important. And then obviously like financials and client expectations being met and feedback surveys and stuff like that. Super, super important. Now, managing 200 employees, growing this, scaling this business, I'm sure you were stretched and stressed and and had a lot of stuff to do. How do you manage your own time and delegate, create accountability within an organization, make sure that you're not getting overwhelmed or the bottleneck that's slowing down or causing issues for the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really hard for a lot of founders to do because founder dependency is one of the biggest valuation killers when it comes time to exit. And it's a huge risk for the company if there's so much riding on a single individual, the founder. B, it's incredibly stressful and not healthy for the founder, even though he or she thinks that they're Superman. It's taking a toll internally, and obviously that's scientifically proven with reduced sleep is not a good thing. So it's all about surrounding yourself with the right people and having the right measurements and communications in place. And if you can do so with people that you like and trust that can produce, then it allows you to sleep, A, work less hours, B, sleep better at night, and most importantly, go and recharge and take vacations without anything falling apart.
Yeah, for sure. I have to remember that, we're all human at the end of the day and you need a break and running a business or your life and, being stressed out or sleep deprived is not a good place to be for decision making and just, enjoying your life at the end of the day. Now, you mentioned getting ready for exit. Now, were you planning all along with your company that the strategy was to sell to maybe a competitor or exit the company? How long was that process? What was the thought for you as far as, getting ready to sell the
Yeah,
company?
we definitely didn't think about it from the beginning, and we were fortunate that we had like three mini exits during our journey
Mhm.
via some significant licensing deals, one to IBM, one with Microsoft, that wiped out a very large portion of our revenue stream. But we managed to pivot and reinvent ourselves a little bit and continue to grow the business. We also had an asset sale of one of our divisions midway, through our or think about 8 years into our corporate life, maybe a little bit less. So, but for the big one, I really started taking it seriously about 3 years prior to it actually happening, and I came across on a phenomenal advisor who I work with now. This firm now that we've been working together jointly, we have 38 exits under our belt, totaling $1.2 billion in founder wealth created. And
Yeah.
he really opened my eyes and told me many of the things that need to be put into place in order for the outcome to be as maximized as it can be. So we jointly, worked on it for multiple years before having the exit, and that's something I advise on a lot of founders to do now because you can't. There's just a whole bunch of things that need to be, tidied up, prettied up, and structured better inside of an organization, which, if not done properly, it's not good. It doesn't mean a company can't be sold. It just means the final valuation is not going to be what it could be.
Definitely. Can you elaborate a bit on those specific areas that you worked on or that are quite critical to preparing for exit?
Yeah. So, first of all, you definitely want to show growth, right? When you're preparing your company for exit, you want to show, trailing, 2 to 3 years of growth because a flat organization is going to be less attractive to one that has, 2 or 3 years of 10+% growth on an annual basis. You want to make sure your internal processes of closing your books is as sophisticated as possible, so that books are closed and reports are generated and produced that are A, very accurate, and B, come out very timely. Less than 7 days after the month closes is ideal, and that is very possible. Don't let anybody tell you that it's going to take at least 10 days to 2 weeks to close the books. That's
Yeah.
that's just not true. It's possible to close them quicker. And you also want to make sure that you can clearly articulate your differentiators in the marketplace, right? Because you want to show an acquirer that your technology or your service offering or your product is going to be hard to replicate for customers. And lastly, you want to be able to clearly prove that there's continued growth available in the business, right? So if nobody wants to buy a business that is completely flatlined, even if it's been growing for the last 2 years or 3 years straight, buyers want to see that it can continue to grow, right? So you need to clearly articulate how much juice is left in the business on a go forward basis.
As far as the negotiations and actually selling the business, how was that process for you? Did you work with like brokers or lawyers or merger and acquisition personnel, or was it more you and this advisor that you had? What was that like?
We definitely brought on an investment banker, and we went through a very structured process of inviting three different investment bankers to interview us to learn more about our business. And then they went away for a month each, and they came back with a strategy and presentation on how they would represent us. So there's a lot of investment bankers available, and many of them have certain expertise in certain industries. So it definitely behooves anybody that's looking to go to market, even with an advisor by their side. Even though I had an advisor by my side and I advise other companies now, the investment bankers, they're the pros at bringing buyers to the table and creating an auction. I mean, your best case scenario is when you have multiple bidders that are looking to buy your company. That's the best way to maximize valuation. So obviously, the lawyers and accountants, and those are prerequisites. You definitely need those. You'd be really, really well served with a founder advisor. Not to pat myself on the back. There's many more like me in the world. To put somebody next to you whose success is based on your success, and then to jointly, hire an investment banker and have them execute the transaction.
Great. Yeah, detailed layout there. Perfect. Let's dive into your advisory. Share a bit about some of the, clients that you work with. What's a good fit for you? What areas of advisory do you help with? What's
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my ideal customer is someone that's been in business for 10 plus years, is doing at least $10 million US in revenue. Also, I like to work with folks that have like the majority of their wealth, tied up in their business, like I did. I had like 95% of my net worth, tied up in this liquid asset called my company. And it's really, really important to me to have, the best outcome possible. So that's my ideal ICP. From an advisory perspective, the first thing I always start out with is an exit readiness assessment. This is a series of questionnaires, and it's nowhere near as complicated as it sounds. It takes about 25 minutes to complete, and it gives the customer a really good understanding from three different lenses on their personal readiness, their financial readiness, and the company's readiness to go for an exit. It's a really eye-opening, set of reports that allows us to identify gaps and then to jointly put together a roadmap to address those gaps in order for us to get to a maximum valuation.
Right on. And how long are you typically working with clients to, like, are you specifically advising them to help them towards this exit, or what's sort of the time frames and expected, outcomes that they're looking for?
The average time frame is around 2 years. Projects sometimes go 3 to 4, which is totally fine because some like the things that I mentioned earlier, they can be fixed overnight. They need to be
Yeah.
addressed, and these aren't like overnight fixes to put everything that I just mentioned prior into play. So average two-ish. Some projects go 3 or 4. A project can be done in as quick as if somebody has their ducks in a row that I mentioned earlier, and they really need to get to an exit sooner, then that's definitely possible. Again, as long as everybody understands that there's often some risks associated with going quicker, but definitely doable under the right circumstances.
Yeah, always some trade-offs there. I'm sure if you want to go quickly, maybe the evaluation isn't going to be as much, as potentially extending
Right.
the time frame and things like that. Okay. And what do you feel is the biggest challenges, problems that you encounter for these businesses that maybe the owner's coming to you and saying, I want to sell my business in the next couple of years. What are the hiccups or friction that can happen as they prepare or move through the process?
Yeah, there's so many, and no two are the same.
Mhm.
There's sometimes problems with a cap table, right? Some companies have a very clean cap table. Like for instance, I was a sole owner of my business, and I had 10% of my stock in stock options. Very, very clean. Others have a myriad of ex-partners and family members and ex-spouses that all own a piece of the pie, and that makes for a very just it complicates a transaction unless those delineations are clear cut and the people aren't disruptive to the process. That's key because some of them can be disruptive to the process. Having your ducks in a row from an accounting perspective, right, and having the corporate governance that I mentioned earlier of having everything super organized, very methodical, and the ability to close every single month on a timely and accurate basis because a sales process will take multiple months. It can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Some go a lot quicker. We were so incredibly organized that we closed in 30 days because like we architected it to be closed very very quickly because like we were set up for this. Other companies just aren't that well organized. So cap table, financial processes internally, executive team also can play a role, right? Depend also specifically if you're looking to sell potentially to a financial buyer, they're buying the team as much as they're buying the company and the product, right? They want to make sure that the team that they're investing in or acquiring is capable of getting it to the next level. And if it isn't, they will not hesitate to put their own team in place, either
Yeah.
wholesale swap or just individual members.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, they want to get, the best return on their investment, and if that means changing some people or some parts, then they'll go ahead and do that. Wonderful. Looking back on your success with your company, if you were going to maybe sidestep some issues that came up or do things a little differently, what are some things that come to mind with
Yeah.
maybe the start or growth of your company?
Hindsight being 2020, we were a
Yeah.
victim of our own success. Our products were in such great demand, and we continue to grow our revenue that we didn't concentrate on recurring revenue enough. And as a result, our valuation suffered. Only 10% of our revenue was contractually recurring, and 90% of it, needed to be refilled every single year. Now, I had complete confidence that we were going to grow every year because we grew every single year for 26 years straight. But it's very, very hard for any buyer to have that same level of confidence in the business that doesn't have contractually obligated recurring revenue. So that's probably the biggest wrinkle I had in my company that if I were to do it over, concentrate on recurring revenue versus one-time project-based revenue.
Definitely. That's great. Perfect insight. So for those out there looking to connect with you, learn more about your advisory, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, best way to reach me is via my website, which is stephenpivnik.com. That has all of my social media handles. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. Both those handles are at Stephen Pivnik as well. And then on the website, we'll have links to my podcast, my book, various adventures and experiences that I'm planning for entrepreneurs. So website is the best way to learn more about me.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put a link in the description of this wherever you're, listening or watching. Go to the website, check it out, get all that great, content, connect with Stephen here. What does the future hold for you? Or what are some of the, I know you got lots of personal, stuff with you mentioned, doing Ironmans and all that kind of thing. Give us a little insight of what you see for yourself and maybe some of the personal endeavors that you're working on now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm continuing to pursue my endurance sports addiction. I
Yeah.
just ran my 18th Ironman, and I'll definitely
Wow.
do more. I climbed Mount Everest last year. I didn't make it to the top because I got very sick. Not altitude sickness. I just got a cold when it was a very, very severe cold, and I couldn't continue. So I definitely want to go back to Everest, either next year or the year after. And I'm super excited about combining my advisory work with endurance training. So I'm actually hosting two separate events. One of them has triathlon training as the endurance component, and the other one has beginner mountaineering training as the endurance component. Both experiences are going to be bookended with advisory work, specifically this exit readiness assessment that I just mentioned. So
Yeah,
the triathlon training one is going to happen right here in my backyard in Atlantic Beach, New York, in a couple of weeks in July of this year. And the mountaineering version is going to happen in Ecuador in January. And
wonderful.
my
Mhm.
website will have information on both of those.
Perfect. That's exciting and great to see, mixing that fitness with business, fitness as well, mind and body. So super important. Keep everything working together. And appreciate you coming on here, Stephen, sharing your insights and wisdom. And yeah, just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. I appreciate it.